So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brianna Trelevan. I am the executive director of the Shaker Historical Society. And I wanted to start out by just kind of giving a little bit of why I chose this talk for this month. This is my fourth director's desk talk. I started doing them for members in December, but I only started at the Shaker Historical Society of January of last year. So I'm still fairly new. I've been here for a year. My first year has been consumed by the pandemic. So it's been an interesting start. But when I first started, and I was trying to just familiarize myself with the collection and with the history of Shaker Heights, I came across a mention about William Van Aken's sisters having a store. And I thought that was so interesting because you don't hear about women from women from the early 1900s having their own business. And so unfortunately, I just didn't have time to really delve into that history when I first became director, because then we got hit with the pandemic. And so because March is Women's History Month, I thought that was the perfect excuse to really take time to kind of delve into this history and to celebrate two women who were some of the earliest merchants in Shaker Heights. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my presentation? Okay. So normally when I do my director's desk talks, I like to have like objects to show, but the reality is there isn't much that we have on the Hank sisters. They very much get overshadowed by their younger brother, which isn't surprising considering he was the first mayor. So I've set up kind of a PowerPoint that compiles all of the research that I have been able to find working from our collection at the museum and various online databases. So, newspaper archives or let's see. Let's see. It's now, okay, there we go. It's like, it's not letting me advance. So to start off talking about the Hank Van Aken family, I'm gonna actually move your screen over if I can, because right now you're blocking the text a little bit. Okay. So the family farm was located at East 128th and Woodland, which most of the time when I mention Woodland, it is the street that we now know as Larchmere. The name changed once Shaker Heights acquired that land in that area of the city. So I'm still going to refer to it as Woodland most of the time because that's how it's referred to. But most of the time, unless I say otherwise, it's now Larchmere. And East 128th is now known as Kendall. So a lot of the streets were renamed when they became a part of Shaker Heights. But the family farm was located at East 128th and Woodland. The early neighbors of the family were the Mill family of the North Union Shakers. So they definitely, their land kind of abutted that of the Shaker property. And the area that they settled in was a settlement of Dutch and German immigrants who operated small farms in the area. So they weren't the only farm in the area. And Fred and Mary Hank had three children. Catherine Hank, who her married name, if I'm saying it correctly, is Shoger, Anna M. Hank, and then Helen A. Hank. And Fred died in a quarry accident in 1873. And then Mary ended up marrying John Van Aken, and they had one son, William J. Van Aken, who we know today as a mayor of Shaker Heights. He was also involved in the Shaker Historical Society, so he's involved in our history as well. But I wanted to include this clipping here because I think it's so funny. The context, they were talking about how they were the older sisters of Mayor Van Aken, and I think the caption, "They spanked the mayor," is just too funny. But this newspaper, unfortunately, we just have a clipping and there's no mention of what newspaper it came from or what time period. But based on the based on the events that are mentioned in the clipping, I'm guessing it's from like the 1930s, 1940s. But I just thought that it was just so funny. One of the quotes from the article said they spanked Van Aken when they thought spanking was needed. So you know, they were very much the older sisters. So the beginning of their partnership. So the sisters, Anna and Helen, they actually began by making vests in their home for Joseph and Feiss Company. And if I remember correctly, they were only 16 and 18 at the time. So they were very young, but they were already making clothing for a company. This is an ad from one of the city directories. I'm trying to keep track of chats as they come in, but I might miss something and I'll look at them after. And then around 1900, Thomas Scove, he had actually purchased and dismantled the Shaker Grist Mill, which used to be located along Doan Brook, and then the machinery was moved from the original stone mill to a frame wooden building near Coventry and Lower Lake. If you're familiar with Shaker Heights, you might remember where that is. So the mill was moved there. Thomas Scove had purchased it and eventually dismantled it and then used the wood to build two buildings at the intersection of Woodland and Ingersoll, which is now known as Mount Carmel Road. So this stretch of woodland, if you're looking at this map here, this is the corner where he built the property. This stretch of woodland is still known as Woodland. This is not Larchmere. But this building here, it has S for store. This is, it's a pretty good guess that this is the store that that he had built. And then the sisters in 1905, they saved $200, and I was looking at some inflation calculators to figure out how much that would be today, and that would be almost $6,000 today. So that's pretty impressive for the time. They saved $200 to open a combination dry goods and confectionery store in this building that Thomas Scove had built. And I think it's interesting that at this time, this actually would have been considered Newburgh. Now it's the city of Cleveland. But during this time, it was the city of Newburgh, which eventually was annexed into Cleveland. And you'll notice in this city directory, it lists here NBGH Newburgh as the city. And something that I think is really interesting is I found in an old issue of our newsletter that Helen had said that Thomas Scove had suggested that they operate a store on the first floor and they live on the second floor. But according to the recollection from Helen, she said that they basically commuted. They would walk from the family farm to the store. But this directory has the same address for their residence and the store, which seems to indicate that they might have lived there even briefly. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they might have lived at the store because in the map it notes it is 2 floors. And there I found 2 addresses listed for this early store, 11325 and 11525. And I actually overlaid 2 maps in this center image. One is the 1912 Cleveland Plat Book and the other one's a 1912 Sanborn map. And if you can see, in the lower map, the address says 11325 and the other map says 11525. So at some point the address changed a little, which, you know, is not uncommon. You know, we've already talked about how the street names changed and the address numbers changed. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting little detail that is noticeable within maps from the same year. And this very first store, as I mentioned, is a combination dry goods confectionery store. And so the early mentions of it in newspapers and recollections from Helen in our museum newsletter note that the store was 2 rooms that was separated by an archway, and that the confectionery store was in the west room and the dry goods store in the other. And again, I just thought that was kind of an interesting little detail. But that was, so 1905 is really the beginning of A&H Hank Dry Goods, which lasted until 1946. So the business started to grow. In 1910, they opened a second store at 12102 Woodland, which is now Larchmere. And Helen operated this new store while Anna stayed at the original. By 1915, the city directories list it as a meat market, so they must have sold the store by that point. So it doesn't seem to have operated here for too long. But this is it's not the greatest image. It's from a newspaper scan, but from 1967. It's a Helen Hank in front of this store in what is now the Larchmere district. In 1911, the Hank Van Aken family moved to 2484 East 128th, which is now 2584 Kendall Road. As I mentioned, Shaker Heights kind of changed all their street names. And you can see in this image, this is William Van Aken on the left. And this is, according to the information I could find with this photo, that this is the house in the background. So this was one of the early houses on the street. And I thought it was also interesting that several references that I found said that the Hank sisters moved into this house, but there were some city directories that listed a different address. So I don't know if they did live in other residences at this time, like the 1910 or 19 teens, like between 1910, 1920, there were some other addresses listed as residences. So I don't know if it was a similar situation where maybe they were living above the store they operated. Could also be a typo. I have found some typos in the old city directories, so it could have just been misinformation. But I found a lot of references again that say Mary Van Aken, William Van Aken, and then Helen and Anna moved to what is now 2584 Kendall, but there was no mention of the oldest sister, Catherine. And then I found a newspaper article that she had supposedly lived with the sisters since her husband died in 1903, including this residence. We do have family members on the Zoom today, so you might know more than I do. But again, I just think it's interesting how there are kind of these different stories that are being told through, again, because we don't have very much, mostly being told through news articles. And then in 1920, they opened another dry goods store in the corner unit here at 12800 Woodland, again, now Larchmere. And this 3-unit building was actually built in 1917 with apartments on the second floor. And the original, the man who constructed it, his name was Louis Sink, and he actually operated a grocery business there. So, they had their dry goods store in proximity to a grocery. I'm pretty sure I couldn't find any mention that this building has changed. This corner unit is actually now, it's called Academy Tavern, if you've ever been to the Larchmere district. So I'm guessing, as I said, I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing that Academy Tavern is actually operating in the same building that the Hank sisters had their business in, which is pretty cool. But by the 1930s, city directories are already mentioning that this corner unit is now a cafe and tavern. So again, I can't say for certain how long they operated this store, but it must have been under a decade, since by 1930, as I said, it's already being listed as a tavern and a cafe. So in 1925, the Van Aken farmhouse that was at the corner of East 128th and Woodland was moved to Griffin Ave, which is a little further south. But this 1914 Cuyahoga County plat book, I don't know if you can see, but this stretch here, it's labeled N, and it notes that it is the proposed Mary Van Aken allotment, which would have been on what was their original farmland. And so this is the land that the house now resides on, the 2584 Kendall, because it's no longer known as East 128th. But it's just interesting to see how the land changes over time, how the farmland is subdivided, and that this allotment was in Mary Van Aken's name. In 1926, the sisters built a store at 12733 Woodland. It was designed by Cleveland architect Frank Peck, which we know from the building card that is up here. You might be able to see up here, it originally says Woodland and it's crossed out and changed to Larchmere. But they operated this dry goods store for 20 years. So this was by far the longest lasting of their stores. It's interesting to me that this was around the time, I would say, like in the late 40s, that Helen kind of started to become involved, from what I could tell, with the Shaker Historical Society. We were established in 1947, but they sold the store in 1946. This photo is actually a detail of a much larger photo. I asked the special collections librarian if he could zoom in for me so I could read what it said. But by 1946, April of that year, they had already sold the store. And so there's a for sale or a sold sign, along with a listing of, they have yard goods, furnishing, household goods, all the stuff that we knew that they sold in their dry goods store. But it was very interesting to me when I was going through old issues of our newsletter that Helen had actually made a testamentary gift of the building to the Shaker Historical Society. So she had a lot of connections with the Historical Society. William Van Aken did as well, but because she knew the Shakers, as I mentioned earlier, the Shaker property actually abutted their farmland. So she knew the Shakers. She obviously knew early Warrensville Township, and because of all of her knowledge of the early history, she seemed to be pretty heavily involved with the Historical Society. She frequently recounted stories for the newsletter, which is where I got a lot of this information. It's incredibly valuable. But she really was interested in the Historical Society and maintained an active interest and participation in it. And then in 1973, the sisters, their estate was inherited by Maisie Koliker. I believe I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But Maisie Koliker inherited a lot of the belongings of Anna and Helen, and then Maisie ended up donating these belongings to the Shaker Historical Society in 1973. And it had over 100, I think it was close to like 130 various like household objects, books, furniture. I was not alive in 1973, so I can't say exactly where all these objects are, because there are some objects that were noted as sold, or I saw one it had a note next to it that it was given to Ruth Van Aken. So I do think that some of the objects ended back with family members. But we certainly do have many of the objects still in our collection. But I think that was a really nice way to kind of come full circle. But the building that was made a testamentary gift was offered as a home to the museum, but it was eventually sold. And from what I could find, the proceeds were placed in an endowment for the Historical Society. So we currently have an investment fund or an endowment, and I haven't found any kind of proof of this, but I suspect that those funds were probably kind of seeded with this money from the sale of the store, which is, I think, really powerful, speaks to the sisters' involvement in their town, in their city, and with the Historical Society. But the store at 12733 Larchmere today is still around, and it's currently the home of Holtzheimer Interiors. But as I said, the building's still around. I suspect that a lot of the other buildings have been changed over the years, no longer exist, but this one I can say for sure does exist still. So as I was doing research, I found this one quote from 75 Years, An Informal History of Shaker Heights. from a Shaker Heights resident who mentions, the most unusual store I recall was a dry goods store on Woodland Avenue run by two sisters. The Van Aken half-sisters, Anna and Helen, operated A&H Hank Dry Goods. It was packed from the floor to the ceiling with goods, and they carried everything we ever wanted or needed. And this is the only photograph that we have of the Hank sisters outside of news clippings, and the only photo we have of their stores. But as you can see, it is very much packed from floor to ceiling. I think it's an amazing photo because there really is everything you could possibly want. Like, you see clothing hanging from the ceiling. There are boxes in the back. I suspect maybe those could be shoe boxes. I know that they had a lot of sewing supplies as well. There have been mentions of that, but I just love this photograph. And as I said, it's the only photo I was able to find of the sisters that weren't just old newspaper clippings. And unfortunately, I don't know the date of this photo. I have not been able to find any context for it. But if I had to take a guess, I would probably say like the 1930s. And this is a kind of zoomed in photo, so you can see a closer view of the sisters. But again, this was a quote from Helen in an issue of the Cleveland Press, a local newspaper. But she talks about how they had such a big stock that when people couldn't find things in the downtown department stores, they would come to their store. So again, really emphasizing the fact that they had kind of everything you could possibly want. I love that she notes they had a display that was purely sewing machine needles. That's a kind of a fun detail. And then this is one of my favorite stories that I came across, again, from Helen. It was in a Plain Dealer article, but she tells the story about how a burglar came into the store when she had a customer, came in with a gun, but instead of being scared or running away, she just threw a pair of scissors at them, cornered one, and then the burglars ran away. And I just think that that is such a funny story. It really shows that these women, took care of themselves. They were self-sufficient. They ran their own store. I think they would have been really fun to have a cup of tea with and get some stories from. And the other, so for this photo, this was again from the Cleveland Press, and Helen Hank is on the left, Anna Hank on the right, 90 and 92. But Mixie, you shared a story with me about how Anna had a tabletop loom. And so I wonder if this is it in the photo here, because this is very much a tabletop loom. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting detail, since you just told me about that maybe an hour or two ago. And then I was like, oh, wow, what a cool connection that this clipping shows a loom in it. And so I'm wondering if this is the same loom that you referenced. But I think that this quote at the top from a newspaper, the Cleveland Press, it says, after more than 90 years, death has done what nothing else could do: separate the Hank sisters, Anna and Helen. So Anna died in 1964. But I just think that that line is very poignant, because they very much were life partners. As I said, they started making clothing together when they were 16 and 18. And so this was a lifelong endeavor. They were very accomplished women. And according to the Cleveland Press, they had 6 stores altogether between 1905 and 1946. So that's very impressive. And just to provide some context for why that's so significant, in the early 20th century, only 20% of all women were gainful workers, meaning, according to the census, gainful workers meant that you were working outside of the home, but only 20%. And that's just working, let alone owning your own business. Women could not vote until 1920. So they had already opened 2 stores before they could even vote. They couldn't serve on federal juries until 1957. And then women cannot get credit cards in their own name until 1974. So not even within their lifetimes. So again, I really wanted to highlight them during Women's History Month because I think that their accomplishments as entrepreneurs and business owners in early Shaker Heights is just so significant. And we don't hear about them very much, and we don't have very much about them. And so I'm kind of hoping that this kind of quick history of what I was able to gather is kind of a starting point for gathering more stories, gathering more histories and memories of these amazing women. So these are just some of the sources. There are actually 2 pages of sources. Happy to share them with you. I'm happy to share this presentation with you if you would like a copy. And this is how you can contact me if you have any other questions. My email is director@shakerhistory.org. You can also just reach the general museum questions, shakerhistory@shakerhistory.org. We try to respond quickly, but we get a lot of emails, so we're doing our best. But as I mentioned, if you ever remember a story about the Hank sisters and you're like, oh, I really want to tell Brianna this, send me an email and we will happily add that to our files for future reference and future research. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and let's see the chat. Okay, so I see that Megan in the chat, if you're interested at all, she uploaded a link to that 75 years in informal history of Shaker Heights, which that one quote came from. But does anyone have any questions or comments? I will actually allow you to unmute now in case you want to add anything, if I can find it. Okay, so yeah, so you can unmute yourselves now if you want to add anything or ask questions.
I think a lot of the information that you got from journals were probably written by Mayor Van Aken's son, Bill Van Aken, who is Louise's and my father. He wrote that journal for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the Van Aken name shows up a lot in our old newsletters, definitely.
And trying to think, the picture that you had of the store, and you had mentioned that the store once was where the Academy Tavern is. If you look at the ceiling of the Academy Tavern and you look at the ceiling in that picture, it's the same ceiling.
Oh, really? Okay. That's good to know. Yeah, I mean, I could see it had like that beautiful like tin ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's very interesting. Oh, Louise, you're muted still.
I had not seen the pictures of the store before, or of Aunt Helen and Annie Ann at a much younger age.
No, younger age is right. We never knew them at that age. They
No.
were always the old aunts.
But we went and visited them a lot, but it was,
Yes.
you know.
And when we were leaving, our hands were filled with coins.
Yeah.
And at Christmas time, we would get silver dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Funny that you remember that. I have no recollection of receiving the coins, but I've got to believe that they did it across the board with all their great nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I remember Annie Ann sending Aunt Helen to go get something, and clearly it was the coins that she would bring back and put into Annie Ann's hands. So, because Annie Ann was always in that chair in the corner.
Right. I also remember Aunt Helen saying one time that in their later life, she would put a little hanky over Auntie Anne's face. So in the morning, she could look for and make sure that the hanky was still moving while they were sleeping.
Yes.
So that she knew she made it through the night.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Another fun story is when Aunt Helen was in the nursing home out in Chardon, Dad took cookies from one of the local bakeries along Larchmere and gave them to Aunt Helen. And she said, "These aren't homemade." She was 101 at the time.
And Dad was so proud of the fact that he had gone out of his way and thought this would be such a nice thing, you know, something she would enjoy.
Oh, my heavens.
Yeah.
Also remember that she had they had a lovely Oriental rug in the living room. But when you walked into their house, there was an odor that came from the rug. And I sort of had this Pavlovian thing for years about Oriental rugs and a funky, musty smell. But I finally overcame it and started buying area rugs. So
Well, we never ventured much past the living room.
well, that's
remember
where the
the
big
dining
rug
room
was.
table?
Yeah, right. And I did mention the weaving loom. I just remember Auntie Anne sitting at the dining room table, just weaving, and Helen would move the loom forward for her. And I think either Aunt Helen or Macy would string it for her, thread the loom for her.
Oh.
So, yeah, I must duck out. It's time for me to join my other class. So,
Okay, well,
Brianna, thank you so much for doing this. And Nancy and Louise, so great to see you.
You
good.
Thank
too.
you for joining.
Sure.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
They had probably a rather rough life, having lost their father at a young age. And then, I don't know if you came across, John Van Aken decided that he was going to homestead out in Dakota. And
Mhm.
so he dismantled a cabin that the first husband had built, Fred, and took that wood out to Dakota to rebuild the cabin, and he took furnishings. Well, then Mary and her son William joined them out. This was in 1888. Joined them later in 1888. Then she had to come back to Cleveland to handle her mother's estate, and decided she brought William back with her. And her attorney decided that she should not go back to Dakota because winters were so harsh. And then John just vacated the property, the homestead property, and nobody really knows whatever happened to him.
Hmm.
So here was another tragedy in her life, Mary's life, that is, and obviously would have had some effect on the sisters. But while Mary was in Dakota, the sisters were boarding with somebody. So their lives had been messed up by this situation
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. But stuck together, you
They
know.
stuck together. So they were very
And
interesting.
they
people.
traveled, you know, didn't they go to Florida and
Yeah.
I think they went to California to visit their sister Catherine. Didn't she live out there, Catherine?
I'm not sure. She did live in the Cleveland area for a long time, but I don't know where she finally lived. But she may have, I know they went to Arizona because I've got a picture of Helen on a horse in Arizona.
I think there is actually one of the news clippings mentioned that she rode horseback on like a recent vacation or something like that to the south.
Yeah.
But they were very interesting people and a lot of history there, and they could recall lots and lots of things.
Mm-hmm. I may be telling tales out of school, but remember the tape that we had heard of Maisie, their niece, right? I think, had put a tape recorder in and asked Aunt Helen and Auntie Anne many questions. Tell us about this or tell us about that. And there were several instances where one of them would say one thing and say, no, that wasn't right. That happened. It was kind of fun. So
Do you know where that tape is now? Because that
That's
sounds
my question.
fascinating.
I
Well,
think I have recordings of it right up here.
Wow. Oh,
Well, that's not it.
yeah, I think it's
I
on
do have-
TV. It was on the old little tiny cassette.
Yeah, but then it's been here. This one was done in 1981. This is the aunties and George being Macy's husband. But these were maybe taken from that reel-to-reel tape. These were sent to me by somebody who lives in California now. And I think you have copies, Louise.
I think I do. I'm just not sure exactly where.
I can find out about getting copies made and sent to the Historical Society. I'm not sure where I would find who would do that
I don't know who that-
down here. I'm in Florida.
if it's a recording, hi, I'm Megan. I'm also a local historian.
I
If
think
it's a
I've
recording-
spoken with you before.
Yes. You might be able to do it on your own computer. If it's a file, you might be able to download it to or burn another CD, but
You can't do that because I've got one of the newer computers that doesn't have that.
yeah, that's what I was afraid of. But that sounds like an awesome source,
Mhm.
primary
Let
source
me-
material.
Let me see what I can find out.
Cool. Brianna, what a great presentation.
Yes, that was
Oh,
wonderful.
thanks. It
yeah.
was it's kind of funny because it's like I spent so long researching, and then when I actually presented it, I was like, that didn't feel very long. But it's just, as I said, like there's just not very much on them in our collection or even in like newspapers. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of local newspapers that we have, like we might have physical clippings of the Cleveland Press, but I don't think that has been digitized. So
We have
I-
a lot of the, it's all on microfilm. We have a lot of it on microfilm.
okay, yeah, I just unfortunately did not have time to look through microfilm
that's
for
part
this
two.
talk. So yeah, exactly as I said, this was kind of my goal was to kind of gather research in one place, and then we can build off of this. So as
Totally.
we get more stories, I actually found a book when I was researching online that, if I remember correctly, it's called Yes, Sir, I've Been Here a Long Time. And it was a series of interviews done with people who lived to be 100. And Helen is one of the interviewees. And so I was looking for this book. It is in no library. So I bought a copy for $4 and it hasn't arrived yet. But I'm so curious to, read the interview with her and see what she has to say and whether, it contradicts some of the newspaper clippings or anything like that, because I'm convinced that some of the newspapers didn't get all the facts right.
That's so cool. You didn't talk a lot about Mayor Van Aken. So did they have any stories about taking care, I mean, besides spanking him, did they have any stories about kind of being the mayor's sisters during the time that he was mayor? I mean, he was really instrumental in making Shaker Heights what it is. I mean, they always, they call him the third van, or the three vans, and he often gets overlooked when people talk about the founding and development of the city. But he was equally as important.
Yeah, I didn't actually find, because so unfortunately, a lot of the articles were written when either Anna passed or Helen passed. And so the focus was on them, or when Catherine passed earlier. I think she passed in 1943, I want to say off the top of my head, but
Quite a bit younger, yeah.
yeah,
Quite
so
earlier.
yeah, so that's kind of the context of the articles. So they didn't really go into their relationship with William or anything with that. Really, they would just mention kind of like their younger brother is William Van Aken. Like that was kind of the extent of it. Other than that one clipping Well, it's really, we just have a copy of the clipping. We don't even have the actual clipping. And I don't know what newspaper it's from, but the spanking one just mentions how, you know, they raised him, they fed him, they walked him to school, they helped with homework, like all of that stuff. But that's really the only newspaper article that kind of even remotely delved into their relationship as half siblings.
They were quite a bit older.
Right.
He was born in 1884. Helen was born in 1870, and Anna and Catherine before that.
And he
So,
died
yeah,
long before they did too. So he died pretty young, really.
Right.
I mean, much
Yes, he
younger than.
did.
Yeah, he died in 50.
Yeah.
So,
But I think a lot of the attention that was drawn to Annie Ann and Aunt Helen was from our dad, you know. He
Right.
was very, very, very close to them, and very, very close to their mother. His grandma Mary was just the be all and end all. And so therefore was in with Annie and Aunt Helen a lot also. So I think he was responsible for bringing a lot of their story up into the limelight.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he, Nansky, as you said, if he was kind of involved with getting those stories from Helen for the newsletter, because they used to do kind of like every newsletter, like a different story about like Warrensville Township and early history of Shaker Heights, and Helen did contribute quite a bit. Sometimes it was the same thing, you know, that she had said in a previous
Sure,
issue,
sure.
but still.
That happens to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
But dad was writing the journal, so
it was a very important thing for him to do too.
yeah.
Spent many hours on that.
Well, now it's a wealth of information for us. Like truly, it's
Good.
they had such
Good.
good information in them. I reference them all the time when I'm doing research.
That's nice to hear.
Are you thinking of digitizing those, bring them up online?
I've actually digitized most of them, if not all of them, because I wanted to make them searchable for my own use. So now it's
Good
just a
idea.
matter of adding them to the website. But yeah, they are actually all digitized, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, there you
Okay,
are.
so I just wanted to kind of end this by talking about some news related to the Shaker Historical Society. So this is very new. We haven't announced it publicly yet because we just recently found out, but we received a $5,654 Ohio Humanities Grant to
Wonderful.
start an oral history program at the museum. And so since we were speaking of the Village Garden Club, they're actually going to be our inaugural group who we are interviewing. So we developed a very good relationship with them last year when we did an exhibit about the group. And so they were very eager. They had actually mentioned it before we had ever even thought about applying for a grant. They had mentioned, like, you know, some of our members are getting older. We'd really like to record their memories of the club. And so we are focusing on them this year, but our goal is with the funding to purchase equipment that will allow us to continue this every year and kind of focus on a different group or around a different theme, and to collect, you know, stories that don't really get told very often or aren't represented in our collection currently. So we're very excited about that. But actually, when I was speaking with Sarah on the phone earlier, I was like, you know what, we should interview all of you and get your stories and your memories of you know, Anna and Helen and all of your family members. I think that would be really interesting. That's a conversation for another day, but just to kind of put it on your radar. And so we've also, staff has been very busy with spring cleaning. The museum is currently closed. So we've been trying to take advantage of that by cleaning out rooms that have, you know, accumulated stuff, as you can put it, since we moved in 1971. Some of the rooms have gotten very cluttered, and we have a lot of space that is just being underutilized. So we have been very busy trying to kind of clear out rooms with some big goals for the future of trying to create new exhibit spaces, new rooms for programming, potentially new workspaces and offices. But we also have been cleaning because we are getting ready to reopen. And so after talking with some staff, and now that, vaccines, I have not been eligible for the vaccine yet, but hopefully soon I will be getting a vaccine. So we are hoping to reopen by appointment only for the month of April, just so I'm able to kind of better accommodate other projects that I'm working on this month. And then we want to fully reopen by May 5th. So I'm very excited about that. And we still have a lot of cleaning to do before we are fully ready to reopen, but that'll be really nice to once again open. We've been closed for most of my first year here at the museum. So it's been a strange year. Our current exhibit, Shaker's Attic, which it actually opened last November, only a few days before we closed again. So that was unfortunate, but that is still going to be on view through May 23rd. And then our next exhibit is tentatively going to open in June. We don't quite have a title yet, but it's going to be about the Shaker Lakes Canoe Club and Lower Lake. And we've really made an effort during the pandemic to create digital versions of all of our physical exhibits, and we plan to continue that. So if you're unable to make it to Cleveland to see, our future exhibits, they will be available on our website. And so I wonder if I can.
The current one is also available.
Yes,
on the
I was
website.
going to pull that up.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So it's actually on our main website. If you just go to exhibits and collections and digital exhibits, all of our digital exhibits are there. So this is Shaker's Attic. But the reason I wanted to pull this up is because this Van Aken family rifle was actually a gift from the Maisie Koliker estate and Helen and Anna Hank. So as I mentioned, in 1973, we got a very large donation of a variety of things, and this was one of them. And we're currently featuring it in our exhibit. So I wanted to kind of show that to you. I thought you might get a kick out of that.
Never heard of that rifle.
I have not heard of that either. Wow.
Well, this is what it was attributed to. I guess I have no way of knowing if it's true or not, but we were told that it was owned by the Van Aken family, but it's very much like the model that it was after doing research it was focused towards like young boys and beginner hunters. So it wasn't like a hardcore like hunting rifle, but
no machine gun or anything.
No, not at all. And it currently is missing a piece, so it won't even fire anymore.
And they had a rifle range in the basement of the Shaker Heights High School, where all the kids learned how to shoot for years and years and years. A lot of previous generations of Shaker residents who grew up here remember being taught to shoot.
Boy, I think Dad missed that class, Nancy.
I think so too.
Might have been a little after him.
Well, he was very much against guns.
Yeah, would not have had. Yeah. So it must have been Grandpa's.
I learned to shoot at summer camp.
Yeah.
So
They were BBs, yeah.
So that's it for me. I'm very grateful that you were able to join and add some personal recollections and stories. I think it adds to the research that I've done, which, is a lot of just kind of addresses and facts, and getting that personal side of it is really nice. So thank you for joining us.